just started chatting about it over the next few weeks and started talking with some other friends, and it started to actually seem like we were going to be able to get together a pretty talented group of people, because there was a lot of people available in town, and there wasn't really, work at other studios in town, so everybody's options were essentially to go it alone or form a small team, or move who knows where, wherever you could find work, probably across the country, because there's really not that much in terms of game studios in the Northeast. So yeah, it just kind of rolled from there. Like, conversations got more and more serious over the next couple months, and we started having meetings between potential team members and whatnot. And then I guess it probably took about 3 or 4 months after the closure to actually start really doing something formally. Like, it takes a really long time to convince somebody that what you want to do is not go work for a company and make money, but instead work with a bunch of friends based on the idea that you're going to make a game that someday you'll be able to sell. So it took different levels of convincing with different people, and we actually had, not all of us were immediately from Irrational at that point. Actually, the 2 engineers we're working with, one, Damian, it was just finishing up on his own project and was beginning to look for somebody else to work with, so that worked out for us. And Bryn, the other engineer, had a long working history with Scott, the art director, that I'd formed the studio with, and he actually left his job at Harmonix to come and join us, which is crazy and awesome. But that's pretty much it. It was, February, studio closed, March, April, May, it was even into June, was just, conversations and getting things rolling, and then June, July, August, September, like right up to now, has been actually making a game.
Cool. Now, what's the main difference between being indie and working for a publisher? Like, why would somebody, like, for instance, why would you leave Harmonix to work for, an indie company?
Well, I think there's a lot of big differences. I think one of them is just sort of being able to be in control of your own future. Like, this was, for me, the second studio that I had been at that had shut down. Previously, I was at Chaos Studios in New York, which had also closed. I actually left them not that long before the closure, because I sort of sensed that it might be coming. But, I had hit a point where I felt like the next time that I lose a job, or, that sort of thing happens, I'd rather it just be my own fault. So by running my own company, by, working with and partnering with the people that I'm partnering with, we're now in that situation, where we're much more in control of our own destinies. So I think that's one big difference, Yeah. I think another one, too, is for us, we just need to support 6 of us in the end. So we can make something that's far more, weird, off the beaten path, I think, than something that, a huge project with tons and tons of people working on it needs to sell a lot of copies and make a lot of money to make it, worthwhile, because it is a business, people are spending a lot of money to make these things. So for us, it gives us the freedom to work on something that's a little more off the beaten path, I'd say, because we don't need to sell millions of copies to be, really successful. We can sell many, many fewer than you would need to for a major, console release at a major studio, in order to, be pretty comfortable.
Right.
So I guess those are some of the big differences. Also, there's it's not all positive, of course. Some of the other differeces are working at a big studio with a huge amount of resources. There were points where I could say, hey, I need X, Y, or Z. Like, I need a mocap animation of, a kid playing in this way or something. And just a couple days later, I would have it. Like a mocap studio across the country would record it, and then I could get in an engine, and, huge amounts of energy could be expended with incredible speed. And the resources could be incredible. Like, at this point, if I want a mocap of anything, it's too bad. I'm not getting it. Like, there's no mocap.
No.
If I want, a voice line or something, strap on a mic, because that's, I don't have access to the sort of resources. So,
I thought
you
you
know,
were
for
going to
us,
say. I thought
one
you were
big
going to say
difference
you were
is
going to hop in the suit.
yeah, yeah, I know. Maybe do one of those hacky things like I see some people doing using Kinects, like Xbox or Microsoft Kinects to do mocap with. Um, but that's a big difference on the other side. So for us, it's very different in terms of how we need to think about what we can do. You know, like it's at a big studio with a big budget. It almost feels like the sky's the limit in terms of the sort of choices you can make, and it feels like anything you want to do, you can do. Like you're not going to be able to do all of it, but you can pick any point, and you can say we're going to do whatever it takes to get to that point, and you will get there because you will just force that to happen. Whereas for us, there's a lot of points that we can pick. Like we could just put a point down on the map and say we are going to make the game do this, and we never ever ever will because it's just going to be beyond our capabilities. Beyond what the six of us are able to do on our own. And for us, that's really important now to think about with everything we do. Is like, all right, what can we do to solve this problem that only requires the people in this room to solve it? That doesn't need, some other outside force.
Now, speaking of the team, can you sort of do like a quick rundown of who's working on the project and their backgrounds?
Yeah, for sure. One other advantage of working at a small studio, I can actually remember everybody's name. So it's myself. I've been doing level design professionally for, I guess, over 8 years now, almost previously at Irrational on BioShock Infinite. Before that at a place called Chaos. And for years before, just made mods in my spare time. I'm working with Scott Sinclair. We were the two that started it. He was the art director on BioShock and BioShock Infinite, and also worked at Harmonix for years, like on games like Rock Band and Guitar Hero. We're working with Gwen Frey and Chad Leclerc, who are both artists on BioShock Infinite. Gwen was a technical animator, and Chad was an environment artist, which means he worked on the levels. So, every time he stepped into a new space in Infinite, there's a good chance Chad had something to do with lighting it or making the atmosphere feel beautiful. And the two engineers we're working with are Damian Isla and Bryn Bennett. Damian's sort of big claim to fame was that he was the lead AI engineer on Halo 2 and 3. So that means he was the programmer responsible for all the stuff that the AI did. More recently, he's been running an indie studio out of Boston, which just released their game Third Eye Crime, which was what he was finishing up. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's actually out on iOS and Steam right now. And last, Bryn, who most recently was at Harmonix. He had previously worked at Iron Lore. He was the tech director on, why am I blanking at Titan Quest. And he was actually tech director at Irrational many, many years ago during the Freedom Force days. I'm not sure if you remember that or ever
I
played
remember
that game.
Freedom Force. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So he goes back. He was at Irrational long ago. Like I never overlapped with him there.
Cool.
Sure. But that's the team. That's the six of us, and we're also working with sound is being done by Pat Balthrop, who was the audio director on BioShock and BioShock Infinite, who now runs his own company. And he's not a member of our team, but we're working with him. We're good friends with him, and he rounds out the one area that we lack in terms of core developer skills. Like we don't have any real experienced sound design people on staff. We've got Bryn is an accomplished musician, but he's not going to be doing the kind of sound effects and atmospheric work that we really need. That's the team.
Now, in assembling your team, how many different concepts and ideas were you guys kicking around before you settled on the idea that turned into the Flame and the Flood?
I don't think it was we didn't have a dartboard full of different ideas at any point. I mean, there was maybe two that were kind of subtle or not subtle, but kind of variations on one another. I guess the way we work is not so much throw a whole lot of stuff out there and just kind of pick from it. It's more like throw one thing out there and start picking at it, Yeah. So it kind of, we sort of always just started from one idea. It wasn't really we could do this, or we could do that, or we could do this other thing. Like, let's do a first-person game, let's do a strategy game, let's do, a third-person survival. Like we ended up. It really was, we want the camera to be like this approximately, and we want the gameplay to be like this approximately, and we want the atmosphere to be kind of like this approximately, and all these things, like as we start exploring them and we started building prototypes, these ideas got refined and whittled down, and there was a lot of what ifs that we ran through, like a lot of, well, what if, this was the way the game was, or, what if, instead of, what if this is how encounters work, or what if this is how encounters worked, and it's just through a process of kind of trying to, spend a day, build a really rough version of something, see how it feels, feel like, is this going to be the thing, is this what we want to keep exploring or not, and that's sort of how we arrived at like the structure and gameplay ideas. And there was a very similar process for the art where Scott Sinclair would make a concept and then look at it, think about it, and grow to hate it, and then discard it and decide like, okay, totally we need to shift this more in this other direction or more in this other direction. And it's kind of one of those things where everything's sort of moving around, but every movement's a little less as you go, as you figure out how things are. Like, it's almost, I don't know if you looked at the Kickstarter page.
Yes,
partway down, there's a GIF. I'm not going to argue about it, whichever you prefer, GIF or GIF, of the island pieces kind of being formed and wiggling together.
Yeah.
And that's actually kind of analogous in a way to our process, where like you lay down something rough and then you just kind of start nudging and nudging and nudging until it feels right. So that's sort of, I guess, the impetus through where we are now with it.
Cool. And if you were describing this to someone totally unfamiliar with it, how would you describe Flaming the Flood?
I would describe it as the words that I'm trying to remember and learn to speak like I don't sound like a robot. So I would describe it as a roguelite river journey through the backwaters of a forgotten America, in which you forage, craft, and evade predators. Yeah, I mean that's the short answer. It's basically the super short answer is, imagine Tubin meets the Oregon Trail. You're going down a river on a raft, but you're also just trying to survive and stave off illness and keep enough supplies on hand that you can actually survive your journey. But much like Tubin, there's hazards and choices and whatnot that you need to make on the river. So it's sort of a mix of, you're moving down the river, you have an arcade kind of experience there, or an experience that slows down, in which you're deciding the course that you want to plot ahead of you, and then you've got another experience on land where you're landing, you can rest, you can start a fire, you can find supplies, like you can harvest plants and such that you find that are actually useful, and you can craft things to stay warm, stay dry, stay fed, stay hydrated, treat illness if you happen to contract something. So yeah, it's about traveling, it's about surviving, it's about foraging and crafting, and also it's about dodging the predators that are going to be hunting for you, because this world is filled with hungry animals that are looking for a meal, and you are that. So you need to use your wits to distract them, to get around them, to in some way get them off your path, get them onto something more interesting, or incapacitate them in some way. But it's supposed to be about using your wits and using your ability and your abilities to craft and make things in order to deal with the threats, rather than any specific like twitch reflex in which you can just punch a wolf faster than it can bite you or something like that. Like that's not our goal at all. We really wanted to, even though the game looks really illustrated and it doesn't look realistic, we want the basis for it to be authentic. Like we're looking at, in terms of what are the plants you can find. I've been looking at survival guides and such, and wilderness survival guides, and guides towards medicinal herbs that you're going to find in the wilderness, and looking at things like, okay, well, what does this plant do? Can you eat it? If you do something different with it, can it alleviate a condition in some way? We're trying to look at things. We're trying to populate the world with things that have all sorts of different purposes.
Right.
You can figure that out, and if you have some level of familiarity with like actual survival, you probably have a bit of a head start.
Yeah.
Now, vice versa, playing the game is probably not going to equip you to survive in the wilderness on your own. I certainly would not encourage somebody to spend a week playing the Flame and the Flood and then go shirtless into the wilderness to live off the land. It probably would not work out so well for you.
Yeah, it's not going to make you Bear Grylls.
No, for sure. Although I've certainly been watching a lot of, Survivor Man and Dual Survival and all these schlocky survival shows because, they're funny and a lot of them are goofy and you're kind of like, I don't know how real this is, but they present a lot of situations and a lot of knowledge that still sound regardless. I mean, it depends on the show. They're kind of up and down.
Now, I was reading over the Kickstarter page and the dog, Aesop, right? Aesop?
Yep.
He keeps all your items when you die, right? And so that may be...
Not all your items. It's the items that he was carrying. Like, he has a backpack on him, so it's an important distinction for us.
Gotcha. But I sort of got an inkling that sort of hints at the difficulty in the game. So just how difficult would it be? Is it, like Dark Souls hard, or is it something that's going to be easy for casual gamers to pick up?
I think it's going to be pretty hard. I mean, we're really, we're looking at a lot of games that fall into the broad rogue category, tend to be pretty difficult games. Not necessarily difficult to pick up. Like, it's actually really important for us that we be able to just sit somebody down to the game and not really tell them anything, and they can figure out how to play. Like, that's really important, that understanding is clear and that things behave in an intuitive way. But we want there to be challenges, and we want people to need to learn through experience how to play the game so they can get better at it and eventually succeed. I think, this is going to be really hard.
Yeah.
For sure, because this game is beautiful in its tuning, but FTL would certainly be a mark that I would set in terms of difficulty, in that it's a game that's pretty easy to sit down to, and it's pretty easy to survive for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, thereabouts, but it's really, really hard to make it to the end of that game. It takes a lot of experience playing it and understanding its systems before you're really going to be able to get to the end. And that's really the target that we're looking for. Like, it's a game, we're making a game that ends, and we don't want it to be a very long game. Like, we don't want it to take hours and hours and hours to get to the end, but what we do want it to be is a very repeatable game, where maybe it only takes a few hours to get to the end and triumph, but it also takes many, many tries before you actually will learn enough and understand the systems well enough to be able to get to the end. And I think that's the balance goal for us, is that, it's difficult, but it's fair. Like, every time you die, it's important for us to be able to communicate why you died, and from that you should be able to learn, well, I died from this, for this reason, this time. I should have been able to make a decision differently prior to this death that could have prevented it. It should always feel like it's clear what happened, and it's clear and avoided, but it's really hard to make all the right decisions to the point where that never happens, where you never die.